Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Handford, and my wife, Dennae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. On the podcast with us today is David Gritz. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Hi, David. We are looking forward to chatting with you, and we always like to have our guests start out with just giving us and our audience a little bit of background about, your life as an entrepreneur and where your focus is right now.
Absolutely. So I'm a little bit different from your traditional entrepreneur and more, I consider myself a parallel entrepreneur where I work on multiple different ventures at the same time. But essentially, I split my pizza pie in three ways. I have a consulting business where I help startup companies to develop new software products and take them to market. I have a focus in a couple different software companies where I'm involved as a business partner. One called Helium IQ sells to entrepreneurship community management. So for example, we're working with the state of Delaware through the Delaware Prosperity Partnership to be the primary source for all entrepreneurs in the state of Delaware to find resources for them. I'm also working with another organization that I'm part of called Prospect Gen AI, which is a system that uses artificial intelligence to help salespeople and marketing people to reach their end targets. And then the last piece of my pizza pie is real estate. I've been on the transactional side, renovating and flipping properties, and on the rental side, but now I'm pretty much focused just on rentals.
I want you to start us off by kind of going through a tough decision that you've had to make along this journey that you've had as an entrepreneur and talking to us first about one that I call a sore thumb tough decision. So it's a tough decision that you've had to make that did not have that good of an outcome and some of the lessons that you learned through that tough decision.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So one of the tough decisions that I had to make is as I started growing my real estate business, I went through one of the challenges that every real estate entrepreneur that's ambitious goes through. And I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with that too, is you purchase your first property or your first couple properties, and then you realize that the only way to scale your business is to go beyond yourself. You need to get other people's money. You need to leverage what you're doing. You need to bring other people involved, whether it's contractors, it's business partners, or other elements. So when we started the real estate business, I started with just one rental property and then got into flipping. I partnered with someone who had expertise in figuring out how to take a building from a decrepit state with no heating system, with problems with the roof, and turn it into something that looks like on HGTV. And it was a great partnership because I helped figure out the finances and Glenn helped figure out the details on how to make that house into something that someone would want to buy. But the challenge or the tough decision that I made was to really scale that business. And at that time, I was partially in the corporate world. I was working full-time for an IT services company, and I decided to do this at the same time. And as you could imagine, while you're full-time at a technology company that has a lot of demands of you and you're trying to scale a real estate business, there's a lot of challenges. And I was listening to your previous podcast with Peter from Multifamily Secrets, and I recall one of the challenges that he had talked about was not delegating. And I almost did the opposite. I set up systems where I had my business partner and then contractors under him. And we would have systems for acquiring properties, systems for renovating them, and systems for getting them to the point where we could sell them. And the challenge was that I didn't put in enough checks and balances in order to make sure that there were the quality controls so we got all the projects done on time and within budget. And a lot of them went over budget. They went well past the time. And because we were highly leveraged with a lot of other outside investors, it made it challenging to kind of weather the storm through that. So as I went through that business, I had to really divest and shrink a lot of what we were doing to get it down to a manageable size. So it was painful going through all of those periods and having to go back to investors and say, hey, here's why we're behind schedule, or hey, here's why we're over budget. But I think it was one of the most important lessons I ever learned, because in that process, I was able to deal with those very challenging situations, but also from a standpoint of being a real estate investor now, or advising and teaching other real estate investors, it gives me the perspective to almost say, here, I know everything that can possibly go wrong. I know what happens when your investors are unhappy with you. I know what happens when you pull a kitchen out and under it there's hardly any floor. I know what happens when you have a pipe that freezes and it floods the whole basement out, but you don't have insurance because that pipe was outside of the building. It wasn't in the building, so the insurance doesn't cover it. And I've been through all of those really difficult scenarios to know how to deal with the people aspect of it, how to deal with the finance aspect of it. And as I scale in a more responsibly way, to do it in a way that still allows me to do the other two sections of the pizza pie.
Well, it's interesting because, I was talking recently to somebody in the multifamily space. That's where I am as well with the Handford Capital business that we have. And, we were at an event in August, and we were talking about another person that does the multifamily space, investing and has outside investors, pooling money and in that syndication space, if you will. And they say, well, that person has, a mark on them from a deal that they did that didn't go so well. And how do I handle that, as far as like talking to investors and possibly maybe partnering with that person? And I said, honestly, if you have somebody who either in business or in real estate has never had to make tough decisions, I would actually prefer to be with that person more than I would somebody who has never made a mistake, because they're going to eventually make a mistake. And I'd rather them who have already made those mistakes and learn how to mitigate those mistakes moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of things you can do to put protections in place. Like a few of the rules that we had was from learning in the process is one property, one investor, because you don't want the investors infighting with each other or feel that one has the upper hand or take advantage of each other. You want one person to know that they can go to that address, they can see their money being spent on that property. And obviously you can't do that if the dollar value is very high, or unless you find pretty big investors. But that was one of the rules that we had. Another rule that I think is just important is just setting expectations up front and telling your investors or your business partners, look, here's what we expect to happen, but here's all the possible things that can go wrong. And I want you to know those things can go wrong up front, because generally the rule is at least one of those bad things is going to happen. And I can't tell you which one, but I want you to be prepared when it does happen.
And how has going through that tough decision helped you make better decisions as an entrepreneur as you continue to move forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's given me perspectives in a number of ways. One, what makes a good partnership from business partner, an investor, or even a contractor that you're hiring for a certain period of time or a certain job? Like, what am I looking for that? That's one piece that I've learned about. Another piece that I learned about is just like knowing your limits, right? Each part of the process has a certain bottleneck. And if anyone listening is familiar with the book, The Goal, as you continue to grow your business, you're going to hit upon different bottlenecks. And as the owner of the business, your goal is to identify those bottlenecks and resolve them. Because if you don't resolve them, you're not going to be able to get to the next level successfully. So being able to manage bottlenecks is definitely something I carry with me.
So let's shift to a different tough decision that you've had to make as an entrepreneur that had a really good and positive outcome, and some of those lessons.
Sure. So I think a good decision that I made was the one to expand my consulting business. I had been doing it since I was in college, and there were people that I helped with different products. There were people that I helped with different marketing things. And a number of people, including my parents, encouraged me to grow that business because they saw, hey, that's what's clicking for you in terms of people really like listening to your advice and how you coach businesses and your perspective on technology. And I never realized that I had that as a skill. I kind of just took it for granted that I could be the translator between a technical person and a business person. And I've invested the time to hone in on that skill, and I've taken the time to really develop that out. So I think the best thing that I can say is taking a skill that you take for granted and growing that skill. And for me, that was product management and launching or taking products to market, and then being able to share that knowledge with other people has been one of the most rewarding things for me. I mean, when I was in college, I always had the dream to work at a management consulting firm like a McKinsey or a Boston Consulting Group. And I interviewed with those companies, ultimately ending up deciding to work at a big company where I could learn from the CEO. But I still had that glimmer that I wanted to do that management consulting. And it just felt so good to be able to do it and go out there and have clients all over the country that could learn from things that I learned from other experiences. And I just enjoy doing that. And I think for my whole life, I'm probably going to always have different clients that I'm helping.
David, what are some strategies that you use when you are facing difficult decisions in business?
Sure. So there's a couple different strategies. One strategy I use is just elimination. A lot of problems occur in business when you're trying to either do too many things or you're just giving yourself homework assignments. So it's easy when you get into business to think, hey, I need to have a website, I need to have a business card, I need to create an LLC, I need to get an accountant, I need to do a dozen different things. And yes, for most businesses, you absolutely need to do that. And even the same thing with problems, like if I'm building an application, I need to do so many things. But what I've found is a really great tool for myself is to say, well, which of those do I really actually need? Can I eliminate some of those in the beginning? Or maybe I'll get some traction on this idea or concept. And then once I have enough traction, then I'll invest in those overhead related things. And if you focus on elimination, once you get the core concept, or even if it's a product, what features can you eliminate to just get down to that core essential, you'll have a much better outcome because you're going to have whatever the outcome you want, whether it's a business that you're starting, a product you're launching, a new market you're going into, you'll have traction in that sooner if you eliminate things. Another tool I find is really effective is reaching out to people that are the expert in the field. One of the clients that I worked with was a safety management company. It was an application that they built to help communicate between safety managers and line workers so they can be safer in manufacturing jobs and people would be aware of all of their risks. And the owner of that business asked me, how do we learn who has the state of the art, who's the best person in the world at that? So I did a little bit of research and I found a guy named Paul O'Neill. Those listeners might be familiar, not the Paul O'Neill, the baseball player, Paul O'Neill, the former Treasury Secretary under Bush. And that Paul O'Neill wasn't just known for the Treasury Secretary that got fired for Dick Cheney for denying the weapons of mass destruction, if you're familiar with that story. But what he was actually famous for was when he got selected to become the CEO of Alcoa, the largest aluminum manufacturing company in the United States at the time, he went into that board meeting and he said something really controversial, which is our number one value at this company is safety. And to put that in perspective, they were already one of the safest companies in the world per person in terms of how they measure incidents. They were safer than US Steel and a whole bunch of other companies. But he went on to use that keystone habit of safety to then reduce the amount of time that people leave work because they're injured, to use it as a stepping point to implement Lean and Six Sigma as a better form of management, and most importantly, to ultimately allow people's ideas to bubble up. And what I was able to do was, from a simple cold email, I was able to get him to meet with me, the owner of the company, to participate in an interview, and then eventually to become one of the informal advisors of the company. And we took all of his ideas and insights that he learned in Alcoa and put it into the product. So if you're trying to do a business, oftentimes you think, well, I can never reach that all-star in the market because they are so far from me. But a lot of times those people, especially if they're recently retired, they want to help. They want to be involved. They want to have a legacy for themselves. And if they can find someone who's doing a project that's similar to what they did in their career, and if they can help you out with that, they generally will. And I think you just have to be open to the possibility that that can happen and be willing to make the outreach.
All right, we are going to take a short break and hear from one of our show sponsors. When we come back, we're going to talk to David about some of his favorites as it relates to his life as an entrepreneur.
Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HanfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HanfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HanfordCapital.com. And we are back with David Gritz. David, I want you to start us off with this series of quick questions and answers that we call the trifecta by talking to us about your favorite technology that you use in business that helps make your life easier every day.
Good question. So I think there's a lot of different technologies that I use in business today, but I would say my favorite technology is LinkedIn. And you might say, hey, that's unfair because that's a social network. That's more than just a technology. But believe it or not, there's a lot of different ways that you can use LinkedIn. You can use LinkedIn to build your personal brand and add information and experiences that you've done. You can use it as a prospecting tool to find speakers for conferences, or like how you guys reached out to me as a podcast guest, or you can use it to create thought leadership and promote yourself in your area of expertise. So I think a lot of people think that LinkedIn is just a jobs platform, but it's much more than that. And I definitely encourage people to spend time and learn about LinkedIn.
What is a favorite quote that you've heard that has helped you as an entrepreneur?
So there's a lot of different ideas that I've been through or thought about. But if I was to kind of pick a quote or a lesson that I've learned, going back to my early story of Paul O'Neill, essentially Paul O'Neill felt that one of the most important characteristics of an individual is their root character. And he used to believe that it's the essence of the person that comes from what's inside of them and who they are and their belief systems. So I would say ultimately, Paul O'Neill's belief that your root character is what makes you a leader is one of the most important things that you can think about. How do you improve yourself to then be able to help and improve others?
And what about a favorite book that you've read that's helped you make better decisions?
Sure. So one of my favorite books is The Habit Loop. And a lot of people think about that habits are just things that happen to you, but they can't be designed. And that book goes through how do you change your habits and allow them to be something that can drive you opposed to hold you back.
And what's the next thing right now for you, David, on your vision or dream board?
So the next thing that I have is from a business level, I'm working with this business Prospect Gen AI, and we're really focused on how do we help businesses to use the technologies of artificial intelligence and LinkedIn to expand. And our goal is to grow that business to our first 100 clients. And then on a personal level, I'm really into snowboarding. So I have a trip planned to the Alps. So I'm just really excited to get out into the Alps and test my snowboard out there.
Well, that sounds exciting. Well, how can the listeners reach out to you and get a hold of you if they want to continue to follow you or contact you more?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me at david@prospectgenai.com. or just connect with me on LinkedIn. It's a powerful tool. You hit me up, I'll be happy to have a conversation with you.
Great. And we'll make sure on our website at toughdecisions.net that we'll put on the show notes links to those various platforms. And thank you so much, David, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. We look forward to continuing to follow you as you continue to grow as an entrepreneur, and look forward to having you on a future episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.